Why does love feel so close in your mind, yet so impossible in your body? You may say you want connection. You may pray for it, visualize it, prepare for it, and still, when it finally approaches, something inside you tightens. Your chest contracts. Your thoughts speed up. You begin to doubt, overanalyze, pull away, or reach too hard. And the most confusing part is this. It can happen even when the love in front of you is genuine. So, what is really being rejected here? Love itself, or the version of you that does not yet feel safe receiving it? This is where everything begins to change. Because the issue is not always desire. The issue is often capacity. A person can consciously crave intimacy while the nervous system remains conditioned for tension, uncertainty, and emotional survival. In other words, the mind can ask for love while the body remembers danger. And when the body remembers danger, it does not care about your affirmations. It cares about what feels familiar. That is why some people keep calling in the same disappointment wearing a different face. Not because they are cursed, and not because love is absent, but because their inner set point is still organized around protection, not peace. And once you see that, a deeper question opens. If your body learned this pattern, could it also learn a new one? What if your experience of love is not determined by what you find, but by what your system is calibrated to allow? Imagine your nervous system as a finely tuned instrument, constantly regulating your emotional environment, not based on what is ideal, but on what is familiar. Like a thermostat that doesn't measure truth, it measures habit. It does not ask, is this love healthy? It asks, is this what I recognize? And here is where it becomes subtle and powerful, because even when something better enters your life, someone consistent, emotionally available, genuinely aligned, your system may begin to destabilize. Not because something is wrong, but because something is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar, to the nervous system, often registers as unsafe. So what happens next? You might start creating distance without realizing it. You might feel bored, restless, or suddenly uncertain. Or you might lean in too intensely, trying to secure something your body doesn't trust will stay. Either way, the system begins to regulate not toward love, but toward what it has always known. This is the hidden mechanism behind repetition. It's not that you attract what you want. It's that you return to what your system can tolerate. And once you see that your patterns are not random but regulated, another question begins to emerge. What exactly taught your system what love is supposed to feel like? If this is resonating, subscribe to the channel and like the video, because what you're about to uncover might change how you relate to everything. Where did your definition of love actually come from, and what if it was never truly yours? Before you ever spoke about love, you experienced it, not as a concept, but as a pattern, as a tone in someone's voice, as the presence or absence of emotional safety, as moments where you felt seen or moments where you learned it was safer not to be. And your nervous system was paying attention the entire time. It was learning what connection feels like. It was mapping what closeness costs. It was deciding, silently and efficiently, how to behave in order to maintain attachment, even if that meant losing parts of yourself. Maybe love felt like unpredictability, warm one moment, distant the next. Maybe it felt like something you had to earn, prove, or chase. Maybe it required you to be easy, agreeable, low maintenance, someone who doesn't create tension. And so, without realizing it, you adapted. You became the version of yourself that could survive love, not necessarily receive it. This is how conditioning works. It doesn't ask for your permission. It organizes your responses long before you question them. So when you now find yourself overgiving, overthinking, or holding back your truth, it's not because something is wrong with you. It's because something in you learned that this is what love requires. And if that's true, then what you're experiencing now isn't attraction. It's recognition. What if you're not attracting the wrong people, but repeating the same emotional blueprint in different forms? It can feel like coincidence at first. Different faces, different stories, yet somehow the same emotional outcome. The same confusion, the same imbalance, the same quiet feeling that you are either giving too much or never quite receiving enough. But patterns are rarely accidental. Your nervous system does not search for what is best for you. It searches for what it already understands. And what it understands is not always love, it is familiarity. It is the emotional signature you learned early on, the one that shaped your sense of connection. So when you meet someone who fits that internal pattern, something in you relaxes. Not because it is safe, but because it is known. And that sense of recognition can be mistaken for chemistry. This is why overgivers often meet overtakers. Why those who chase certainty encounter those who withdraw. Why intensity can feel like depth, even when it is rooted in instability. Because your system is not asking, "Is this healthy?" It is asking, "Does this match what I've learned to expect?" And when it does, the cycle begins again, subtly reinforcing the same beliefs, the same dynamics, the same internal story. So the real question is no longer, "Why does this keep happening to me?" It becomes, "What part of me is this pattern trying to confirm?" Why does healthy love sometimes feel strangely uncomfortable? You might think that when real love appears, steady, present, emotionally available, you would immediately recognize it as something good, something safe, something you've been waiting for. But what if your body doesn't read it that way? What if, instead of relief, you feel tension? Instead of excitement, a subtle restlessness? Instead of certainty, an unexplainable urge to question everything? This is where the nervous system reveals its deeper logic. Because it does not equate safety with quality. It equates safety with familiarity. And if your past has trained you to associate love with inconsistency, emotional distance, or the need to earn attention, then calm, grounded love can feel foreign, even suspicious. You may find yourself wondering, "Why doesn't this feel intense enough?" Or, "Why am I not as drawn to this as I should be?" But intensity is not always a sign of alignment. Sometimes, it is a sign of activation. And activation often comes from old emotional patterns being triggered, patterns your system recognizes as normal, even when they are not nourishing. So when something stable enters your life, your system doesn't immediately trust it. It tries to regulate you back into what it knows, which leads to a powerful realization. If calm feels unfamiliar, could it be that your system was never taught that love can feel like peace? What if the version of you that seeks love is not the same version that believes it can receive it? There is often a quiet division inside, a subtle split between who you truly are and who you've learned to be in order to be accepted. And this split doesn't always feel obvious. It can look like being kind, accommodating, thoughtful, even loving. But beneath it, there may be a deeper question guiding your behavior. Who do I need to be so I don't lose this connection? This is where self-abandonment begins. Not in dramatic moments, but in small, repeated choices. Saying yes when something in you wants to say no. Softening your truth to avoid discomfort. Adjusting your personality to match what you think will be received well. And over time, something important happens. You stop relating from your center and start relating from your strategy. The nervous system learns that love requires adaptation, performance, and careful management of how you are perceived. So instead of being seen, you become approved. But approval is not the same as connection. Because even if someone stays, they are staying in response to a version of you that isn't fully real. And something inside you knows it. That's why even in relationships, a subtle sense of disconnection can remain. So the deeper question becomes, if you are not fully showing up as yourself, how could love ever truly reach you? If love can only meet you where you are real, what happens when you're relating from a version of yourself that isn't? There's a quiet consequence to self-abandonment that most people never question. It's not just that you lose yourself, it's that you lose the possibility of being truly met. Because connection doesn't happen through performance. It happens through presence. And when you are filtering your words, managing your reactions, and carefully shaping how you appear, you may still be interacting, but you are not fully available. Not emotionally. Not energetically. Not in a way that allows someone to actually know you. So even if someone is right in front of you, even if they are open, interested, and willing, the connection remains partial. And that creates a subtle but persistent experience, being with someone, yet not feeling fully seen. Over time, this can reinforce a deeper belief. No one really understands me. But the truth is more nuanced. It's not always that others cannot see you. Sometimes, it's that you've learned not to be seen. And this is where the pattern becomes self-sustaining. Because the more you rely on performance to maintain connection, the further you move away from authenticity. And the further you move away from authenticity, the less real connection becomes possible. So the question shifts again. What are you protecting by not fully showing up as yourself? And is that protection costing you the very thing you want most? What if the behaviors you've been judging in yourself were never flaws but protection? When you pull away, overthink, people please, or try to control how things unfold, it can feel like you're sabotaging your own chances at love. But what if those patterns were never designed to harm you, only to keep you safe? Your nervous system does not create random reactions. It builds strategies, quiet, automatic responses, shaped by past experiences. And each one has a purpose. To avoid rejection, to prevent emotional pain, to maintain some sense of control in situations that once felt overwhelming. So when you hesitate to express how you feel, it may not be fear of love, it may be fear of losing connection. When you overanalyze someone's behavior, it may not be insecurity, it may be an attempt to predict and prevent disappointment. And when you distance yourself, just as things begin to deepen, it may not be disinterest, it may be your system trying to regulate intensity. Seen this way, your patterns begin to make sense. They are not evidence that something is wrong with you. They are evidence that something in you adapted intelligently to what it experienced. But here's the deeper question. If these strategies were built for a version of your past, are they still serving the version of you who is ready for something real now? What happens when you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing from who you truly are? There is a subtle but powerful shift that changes everything in relationships, and most people never realize when it happens. It's the moment you stop asking, "Do they like me?" and begin asking, "Do I feel aligned here?" At first, it may seem like a small difference, but internally, it changes the entire dynamic. Because when your focus is on being liked, your attention moves outward. You begin adjusting, analyzing, performing, trying to maintain connection by managing perception. But when your focus shifts to alignment, your attention returns inward. You begin to notice how you feel, what resonates, what doesn't. And this is where congruence begins. Congruence is the alignment between your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior. It is the state where you are not split between who you are and who you think you need to be. And from this state, something interesting happens. You become naturally magnetic, not because you are trying harder, but because you are no longer divided. There is no internal negotiation, no subtle tension, no effort to be perceived in a certain way. And that absence of effort creates a different kind of presence, one that others can feel, even if they can't explain it. So the question becomes, if true attraction comes from alignment, not approval, what would change if you allowed yourself to fully stand in who you are without needing it to be accepted first? What are you avoiding? And how is that avoidance quietly shaping your experience of love? Avoidance rarely feels like avoidance. It often feels like being easygoing, understanding, or low maintenance. It feels like choosing peace over conflict, silence over discomfort, distance over vulnerability. But beneath that surface, something deeper may be happening. You may be avoiding being misunderstood, avoiding rejection, avoiding the moment where your truth is not received the way you hoped. And so, instead of expressing what you feel, you soften it. You delay it. You translate it into something more acceptable. You tell yourself, it's not a big deal, even when something inside you knows that it is. This is how disconnection begins, not through conflict, but through the absence of truth. Because real connection requires exposure. It requires the willingness to be seen not only in your light, but also in your uncertainty, your preferences, your boundaries. And when you consistently avoid that exposure, you create a version of connection that feels safe but not real. Over time, this can lead to a quiet frustration, a sense that something is missing, even when everything seems fine on the surface. So the deeper question is not just what you want from connection. It's what you are willing to feel in order to experience it. Why does putting someone on a pedestal quietly disconnect you from yourself? It can feel natural at first. You meet someone who seems confident, grounded, or emotionally composed, and without noticing, something inside you begins to elevate them. Their words carry more weight. Their opinions start to matter more than your own. You begin to read their signals more carefully than you listen to your internal state. And slowly, the center of gravity shifts. Instead of relating from equality, you begin relating from comparison. Instead of expressing, you begin calibrating. Instead of being present, you begin performing. This is the pedestal effect. And while it may feel like admiration, it often creates imbalance. Because the moment you place someone above you, you subconsciously place yourself below. And from that position, authenticity becomes harder. You begin to filter your truth, minimize your needs, and adjust your behavior in ways that feel acceptable rather than real. But here's the paradox. The very act of trying to maintain connection by elevating someone else is what weakens the connection itself. Because true intimacy requires two people standing in their own space, not one reaching upward while the other remains projected. So the question becomes, what would change if you stopped trying to impress and started allowing yourself to meet others as an equal? Why do some people move closer when things get intense, while others instinctively pull away? At first glance, it can seem like personality. One person wants more connection, more reassurance, more closeness. The other needs space, distance, silence. And when these two patterns meet, it often creates a dynamic that feels confusing, even painful. But beneath these behaviors, there is a shared origin. Both are forms of protection. The anxious pattern moves toward connection to stabilize itself. It seeks closeness, clarity, and confirmation as a way to regulate uncertainty. When something feels off, it leans in, asking, analyzing, trying to restore a sense of safety through proximity. The avoidant pattern does the opposite. When intensity rises, it creates distance, not because it doesn't care, but because closeness activates something overwhelming. Space becomes the way it regulates, a way to maintain internal control. And here's what makes it powerful. Both patterns are trying to solve the same problem, emotional safety, but in opposite directions. So when they meet, they often trigger each other. One reaches, the other retreats. One intensifies, the other disconnects. And this loop can feel like attraction, even when it's actually activation. So the deeper question becomes, are you responding to the person in front of you, or to the pattern your nervous system already knows how to play? Why do you often feel drawn to someone who seems to activate everything in you, yet leave you feeling uncertain? There is a kind of attraction that feels immediate, intense, almost magnetic. It pulls your attention in, heightens your emotions, and creates a sense of urgency that feels hard to ignore. You think about them more. You feel more. You react more. But what if that intensity is not a sign of alignment, but a signal of familiarity? Your nervous system recognizes patterns faster than your mind can interpret them. So when you meet someone whose behavior mirrors dynamics you've experienced before, whether it's inconsistency, emotional distance, or unpredictability, something in you lights up. Not because it's new, but because it's known. And that recognition can feel like chemistry. This is why overgivers often feel deeply attracted to those who take. Why those who fear abandonment feel pulled toward those who are hard to reach. The pattern completes itself, reinforcing what the system already expects. But here's the shift. Not everything that feels strong is healthy. And not everything that feels calm is lacking. Sometimes, what feels like passion is activation. And what feels like steadiness is unfamiliar peace. So the real question becomes, are you following what feels intense, or learning to recognize what actually feels safe? What if the real transformation doesn't begin with finding the right person, but with returning to yourself? So much of what we call healing is often framed as something we do to fix relationships, improve attraction, or finally receive the love we've been searching for. But the deeper shift begins somewhere else entirely. It begins when you stop organizing your behavior around being chosen and start organizing it around being present with yourself. This is not about becoming distant or closed. It's about becoming anchored. Because when your sense of stability depends on how someone else responds to you, your nervous system remains in a constant state of monitoring. You scan for signs, interpret silence, adjust your energy. And in that state, connection becomes something you manage, not something you experience. But when you return to yourself, something recalibrates. You begin to notice your own signals, your own comfort, your own truth in real time. And instead of reacting to what is happening outside, you start responding from what is happening within. This is where self-presence replaces performance. And from this place, love is no longer something you chase or protect. It becomes something you participate in without losing yourself in the process. So, the question becomes, what would your relationships look like if your first priority was not being chosen, but staying connected to yourself? What are you unconsciously trying to avoid, and how is that avoidance shaping your choices in love? Most people believe their behavior is guided by what they want. But if you look closely, much of what you do is actually guided by what you're trying not to feel. You might think you're seeking connection, but are you avoiding rejection? You might believe you're being patient, but are you avoiding being misunderstood? You might tell yourself you're giving space, but are you avoiding the discomfort of not being chosen? Avoidance is subtle. It hides behind logic. It disguises itself as wisdom, timing, or emotional maturity. But beneath it, there is often a single thread, a feeling your system has learned to protect you from. And that feeling holds power, because whatever you avoid begins to organize your behavior. It determines what you say, what you hold back, when you lean in, and when you retreat. It shapes your boundaries, your standards, and even the people you feel drawn to. Not based on what is aligned, but based on what feels safer to navigate. This is how patterns repeat. Not because you are choosing the same outcome, but because you are avoiding the same internal experience. So the question becomes, if you were no longer trying to escape that feeling, what choices would you start making differently? What if the key to changing your patterns is not controlling your emotions, but learning how to stay with them? Most reactions happen quickly. A message is delayed, and your mind fills the silence. Someone pulls back slightly, and your body tightens. A tone shifts, and something inside you begins to spiral. And in that moment, the instinct is immediate, to fix it, to interpret it, to respond in a way that restores certainty. But what if that impulse is exactly where the pattern lives? Because when an emotion arises, your nervous system is not asking you to eliminate it. It is asking you to experience it safely. And when you bypass that experience by reacting, analyzing, or controlling, you reinforce the idea that the emotion itself is unsafe. So the cycle continues. But something different happens when you pause. When you notice the sensation in your body. When you allow the feeling to exist without immediately assigning meaning or taking action. When you stay present long enough to let the intensity move instead of trying to escape it. This is regulation. And regulation changes everything. Because when your system learns that it can feel without collapsing, it no longer needs the same protective strategies. The urgency softens. The reactivity decreases. And for the first time, you begin to respond instead of react. So the question becomes, what might change if you trusted yourself to feel without needing to fix what you feel? What if growth in love doesn't feel natural but unfamiliar, even uncomfortable? Most people expect transformation to feel good, clear, aligned, like a smooth transition into something better. But when it comes to the nervous system, real change rarely feels that way at first. Because you are not just learning something new, you are stepping outside of what your system has been conditioned to recognize as safe. And that creates friction. If you are used to distancing when things get close, staying present may feel overwhelming. If you are used to chasing connection, pulling your energy back into yourself may feel like loss. If you are used to adapting, expressing your truth may feel risky, even when it's necessary. This is the paradox of rewiring. The very behaviors that lead to healthier connection can initially feel wrong, not because they are, but because they are unfamiliar to your system. And this is where many people turn back. They interpret discomfort as a sign that something is off, instead of recognizing it as a sign that something is changing. But discomfort, when experienced consciously, becomes the bridge. Not a signal to retreat, but a signal that you are expanding your capacity. So the deeper question becomes, can you stay with what feels new long enough for it to become safe? What if your ability to receive love is not about finding the right person, but about becoming safe within yourself? Receiving love is often misunderstood. It's not just about someone offering you care, attention, or presence. It's about your system's capacity to hold it without resisting, questioning, or deflecting it. Because when love is offered, your nervous system immediately evaluates it. Does this feel safe? Can I trust this? Am I allowed to have this? And if, at a deeper level, you don't feel safe being fully seen, or you don't feel worthy of consistent, grounded connection, something subtle begins to happen. You may downplay what is being given. You may question its authenticity. You may even push it away, without fully realizing why. Not because you don't want it, but because your system doesn't yet know how to sustain it. This is why self-acceptance is not just a concept, it is a capacity. The more you can sit with yourself, as you are, without needing to change, fix, or prove anything, the more your system begins to relax. The more it learns that presence is safe, that being yourself does not lead to loss. And from that place, something shifts. Love no longer feels like something you have to earn or manage. It becomes something you can actually receive. So the question becomes, how would your relationships change if your internal state felt like a place where love could safely land? What if what you've been calling attraction was actually familiarity dressed as desire? There's a moment many people overlook, the instant when something feels exciting, charged, almost irresistible. It feels like a spark, like something meaningful is unfolding. But beneath that intensity, there may be something else at play. Recognition. Not of the person, but of the pattern. Because your nervous system doesn't just respond to what is in front of you. It responds to what it has already known. And when something mirrors an old emotional experience, especially one tied to longing, inconsistency, or the need to prove your worth, it can feel deeply compelling. This is why certain dynamics feel so hard to walk away from. The unpredictability, the highs and lows, the moments of closeness followed by distance, they create emotional spikes that your system interprets as significance. But significance is not always alignment. Sometimes it's activation. And activation can feel like passion. This is where red flags become disguised as red roses. Where instability is mistaken for depth. Where emotional chaos feels like connection. But here's the shift. What if true alignment feels less like intensity and more like clarity? Less like urgency and more like ease? So the deeper question becomes, are you drawn to what feels exciting, or are you learning to recognize what actually feels grounded and real? What if the very thing you've been using to secure love is the thing that has been blocking it? Control often feels like protection. You try to manage how things unfold. You anticipate outcomes, read between the lines, adjust your timing, your words, your energy. You tell yourself you're being intentional, careful, aware. But beneath that, there may be a quieter motive, to avoid uncertainty, because uncertainty feels like a loss of control. And to a nervous system that associates unpredictability with emotional risk, that loss can feel threatening. So you try to stabilize the experience by planning, by analyzing, by subtly influencing how connection develops. But here's the paradox. Love does not grow in controlled environments. It grows in presence, in openness, in the willingness to experience something without knowing exactly how it will unfold. And when you try to control it, you shift out of participation and into management. You stop experiencing connection as it is and start relating to it as something that needs to be maintained, secured, or guided toward a specific outcome. Over time, this creates tension because control is rooted in fear, and fear contracts your capacity to receive. So the question becomes, what would happen if you allowed connection to unfold without needing to control where it leads? What if freedom and love begins the moment you no longer need to be chosen? There is a subtle dependency that often goes unnoticed, the need for someone else's decision to validate your worth. It can appear as hope, desire, even genuine interest. But underneath it, there may be a quiet attachment to a single outcome, that they choose you. And when that becomes the focus, everything starts to revolve around it. Your emotional state begins to rise and fall based on their responses. Their attention feels like reassurance. Their distance feels like loss. And without realizing it, Your sense of stability becomes externalized. This is where power shifts away from you. Because the more your value depends on being chosen, the less you are choosing yourself. But something changes when you reverse that orientation. When you begin to recognize that your worth is not something granted by another person, but something anchored within you. When you understand that connection is not about proving your place in someone else's life, but about deciding whether they belong in yours. This is where freedom begins. Not in detachment, but in self-choice. In the quiet confidence of knowing, I am okay, regardless of the outcome. And from that place, your energy changes. You no longer pursue to secure. You engage to discover. So the deeper question becomes, what would your relationships feel like if you were no longer waiting to be chosen, but consciously choosing from who you are? What if every relationship you experience is not random, but a reflection of how you relate to yourself? This idea can feel confronting at first, because it shifts the focus away from others and brings it back to something deeper, something more personal. The way you speak to yourself, the way you treat your own needs, the way you respond to your own emotions. These internal dynamics do not stay internal. They extend outward, shaping the kind of connections you form and the way others engage with you. If you tend to ignore your own boundaries, you may encounter people who overlook them too. If you silence your own voice, you may find yourself in spaces where you are not truly heard. If you abandon yourself in moments of discomfort, you may attract dynamics that mirror that same pattern externally. Not as punishment, but as reflection. Because reality, in many ways, operates like a mirror. It does not judge. It simply reflects the frequency and patterns you consistently embody. This is not about blame. It's about awareness. Because once you see that your external experiences are connected to your internal relationship with yourself, something powerful becomes available. Choice. You are no longer waiting for others to change. You are no longer trying to fix what is outside. You begin to shift what is within. And from that shift, something new starts to emerge. So, the question becomes, if your relationships mirror how you treat yourself, what would need to change inside you to experience something different outside? What if your nervous system could learn a completely new definition of love? One that feels calm, grounded, and safe. Up until now, your system has been operating from memory, from patterns that were repeated enough times to become familiar. And familiarity, as you've seen, has been mistaken for safety. But here's what changes everything. The nervous system is not fixed. It is adaptive, which means the same system that learned tension can learn calm. The same system that associated love with unpredictability can begin to associate it with stability. And this doesn't happen through force or effort. It happens through repetition, presence, and experience. Each time you stay instead of escaping. Each time you express instead of suppressing. Each time you allow yourself to feel without reacting. You're introducing a new signal. A new possibility. And at first, it may feel subtle, almost invisible. But over time, these small shifts begin to accumulate. The body starts to recognize a different baseline. One where connection does not require tension, where presence does not lead to loss. And slowly, your internal set point begins to recalibrate. Not back to what it was, but forward into something new. A state where love is no longer something that activates you. It becomes something that settles you. So the question becomes, what would it feel like if peace, not intensity, became your new definition of connection? What if the real shift is not in whether someone likes you, but in whether they align with what you truly value? For a long time, the question may have been automatic. Do they like me? Am I enough for them? Am I saying the right thing, doing the right thing, being the right version of myself? And when your attention is centered there, something important happens. You begin to filter yourself through their perception. Your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior, all subtly adjusted to maintain interest, avoid rejection, and secure connection. But in that process, one essential element is lost: discernment. Because when your focus is on being chosen, you stop evaluating whether what's in front of you is actually right for you. But everything changes when the question shifts from, do they like me? To, do I feel safe, respected, and aligned here? Now your attention moves inward. You begin to observe how your body responds, how your energy feels, whether you can be yourself without contraction or effort. This is where standards become grounded in truth, not fear. And from this place, you no longer chase connection. You filter it. You no longer adapt to fit, you observe to decide. So the deeper question becomes, if you were no longer trying to be liked, what would you start noticing about who truly belongs in your life? What if the moment you stop chasing love is the moment it can finally meet you? Chasing often feels like effort, like intention, like doing what it takes to make something happen. You reach out, you invest, you try to move things forward. And on the surface, it can look like commitment. But beneath it, there may be something else. A subtle tension, a need to secure, a fear that if you don't act, something will be lost. And that tension is felt, because when you chase, your energy moves outward in a way that signals lack. It communicates, without words, I need this to feel complete. And even if your actions seem aligned, the underlying state creates imbalance. You give more than you receive. You invest before there is reciprocity. You move faster than the connection can naturally unfold. And over time, this creates resistance. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are trying to force what is meant to be experienced. But when you return to yourself, something shifts. You stop pursuing to fill a space and start existing from a place that is already full. And from that fullness, your presence changes. You no longer reach to be chosen. You remain and allow what is aligned to meet you. So the question becomes, what would happen if you stopped trying to create connection and allowed it to arise from who you are being? What if the true reset has nothing to do with finding love and everything to do with opening yourself to it? For so long, the focus may have been external, finding the right person, the right timing, the right conditions. But the deeper shift does not begin out there. It begins in your willingness to open, not in a dramatic or forced way, but in a quiet, internal permission to feel, to soften, to stop bracing for what might go wrong, and instead allow yourself to experience what is actually present. Because many people are not close to love consciously, but their bodies are. The heart is guarded. The breath is shallow. The attention is scanning for signs of inconsistency or loss. And in that state, even when love is available, it cannot fully land. Not because it isn't there, but because there is no space for it to be received. Opening is not about becoming vulnerable without awareness. It is about becoming available without resistance. It is the willingness to feel what arises, without immediately protecting, controlling, or withdrawing. And this is where the reset happens. Not when you get love, but when you stop defending against it. Because the more open your system becomes, the more life can move through you without obstruction. So the question becomes, what would change if you stopped guarding your heart and started trusting your capacity to hold what comes? What if love is not something you attract, but something you become? For a long time, the focus may have been on techniques, what to say, how to act, how to position yourself to be more desirable, more appealing, more chosen. But beneath all of that, there is a deeper principle at play. You don't experience love because you chase it. You experience love because you embody it. And embodiment is not a strategy. It is a state. It's the way you relate to yourself when no one is watching. It's how you speak to yourself when things don't go as expected. It's how you hold your own emotions without judgment or rejection. Because whatever you consistently are becomes what you naturally express. And whatever you express becomes what you naturally experience. This is the essence of co-creation. Reality does not respond only to what you want. It responds to what you are being. So if your internal state is grounded, present, and open, that becomes the signal you emit. And that signal begins to organize your external experiences in subtle but powerful ways. Not through force, but through resonance. This is why becoming love is more powerful than trying to receive it. Because when you are in that state, connection is no longer something you seek. It is something that reflects you. So the question becomes, if love is a state you embody, who are you being when no one is there to give it to you? What would change if you stopped trying to prove your worth and simply allowed yourself to be seen? There is a quiet habit that shapes many interactions without being noticed, the need to demonstrate value. To show that you are interesting enough, kind enough, understanding enough, worthy enough to be chosen. And this often happens subtly. You explain more than necessary. You give before anything is asked. You adjust your energy to meet what you think is expected. But beneath all of this, there is a message being communicated, both to others and to yourself. I need to prove that I deserve to be here. And that message carries weight. Because when you operate from proving, you are no longer relating from truth. You are relating from validation. Your behavior becomes a response to how you want to be perceived, rather than an expression of who you are. But something shifts when you release that need. When you allow your words to be simple, your presence to be enough, your truth to exist without decoration or justification. This is where authenticity becomes felt, not performed. And from that place, connection changes. Because people are no longer responding to your effort, they are responding to your reality. So the question becomes, what would it feel like to stop convincing others of your worth and start experiencing it from within? What if the anxiety you feel isn't intuition, but an echo of something your body hasn't fully processed yet? In moments of uncertainty, the body can become activated quickly. A delayed response, a change in tone, a shift in energy, and suddenly, something inside you begins to react. Your thoughts accelerate. Your focus narrows. You start searching for meaning, trying to understand what's happening. And in that state, it's easy to assume, this must be intuition. But not every signal from the body is guidance. Sometimes it is memory. Unprocessed emotional experiences can resurface in present moments that feel similar to the past. And when they do, the body reacts as if the same outcome is about to happen again. The sensation feels real, immediate, urgent. But urgency does not always mean truth. This is why learning to distinguish between activation and intuition becomes essential. Intuition tends to feel clear, grounded, steady. Activation feels charged, urgent, reactive. One expands your awareness. The other narrows it. And when you respond from activation, you often reinforce the very patterns you're trying to change. Overanalyzing, reaching, withdrawing, or seeking control. But when you pause, feel, and allow the sensation to move without immediately acting on it, something begins to shift. Clarity returns. So the deeper question becomes, can you learn to trust what is calm instead of reacting to what feels intense? What if the moment you stop abandoning yourself is the moment your entire experience of love begins to change? After everything you've seen, one truth begins to stand out with clarity. It was never just about who you meet. It was never just about timing, attraction, or chance. It was about the relationship you hold with yourself in the presence of connection. Because every time you silence your truth to keep someone close, every time you override your needs to avoid discomfort, every time you become someone else to maintain attention, you are teaching your nervous system that love requires self-abandonment. And from that place, even when connection appears, it cannot fully satisfy you, because something essential is missing you. But the moment you choose differently, everything begins to reorganize. When you stay with your truth, even when it feels uncomfortable, when you honor your boundaries, even when there is a risk of loss, when you allow yourself to be fully seen, without filtering or performance, you send a new signal, a signal of safety, of wholeness, of internal alignment. And from that state, love is no longer something you chase, control, or fear. It becomes something you can receive because you are no longer leaving yourself in the process. And this is the final realization. Your capacity to receive love is directly connected to your willingness to be yourself, fully, safely, and without apology. So the question becomes, who do you become when you no longer need to abandon yourself to be loved? If this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and follow for more. Like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because the moment you shift within, everything begins to reflect it.